The morning briefing room at Bagram Airfield fell silent when General Morrison slammed his coffee mug onto the metal table. Steam rose from the dark liquid as his weathered face twisted into a scowl that had intimidated colonels for 3 decades. Outside, the Afghan sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and shadow, but inside this cramped space, tension crackled like static electricity before a thunderstorm. "Gentlemen, we have a problem." Morrison's gravelly voice cut through the air conditioning's mechanical hum. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a topographical nightmare of jagged peaks and narrow valleys. Red markers pulsed ominously across the digital landscape. Intelligence confirms Taliban forces have established a heavily fortified position in the Korangal Valley. Anti-aircraft installations, surface-to-air missiles, the works. They're dug in deeper than ticks on a hound dog. Major Reynolds, the squadron commander, leaned forward in his chair. His flight suit bore the creases of too many early mornings and late nights. "Sir, standard protocol would be high-altitude precision strikes. B-52s from 30,000 feet, maybe some Predator support." Morrison's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "That's exactly what they expect, Major. These aren't cave-dwelling amateurs anymore. They've got Russian-made equipment and advisors who know our playbook better than we do. Every time we've tried conventional approaches, they melt into those mountains like ghosts." His finger traced the valley's serpentine path on the display. "But there's something else. Our assets on the ground intercepted communications suggesting they're holding American prisoners. We can't carpet bomb our own people." The room's atmosphere grew heavier. Outside, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades announced another medevac helicopter returning from the front lines. Inside, seasoned pilots exchanged glances that spoke volumes about impossible missions and acceptable losses. "What we need," Morrison continued, his eyes scanning the assembled aviators, "is someone crazy enough to thread the needle. Someone willing to fly low enough to kiss the devil's doorstep and precise enough to separate friend from foe with surgical precision." His gaze lingered on each face, searching for something indefinable. "The terrain is unforgiving. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and you become a smoking crater decorating some goat herder's pasture." Captain Vasquez raised his hand, the youngest pilot in the room but no stranger to danger. "Sir, with respect, what you're describing sounds like a suicide mission. No aircraft can maintain effective combat operations at that altitude in those conditions." Morrison's smile held no warmth. "That, Captain, is where you're wrong. There's one bird that was built for exactly this kind of hell." The display shifted, revealing the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, its massive GAU-8 cannon jutting forward like a medieval lance. "And I know just the pilot stubborn enough to make it happen." The room erupted in surprised murmurs, but Morrison's attention had already shifted to the back corner where a lone figure sat quietly, almost invisible among her male colleagues. Captain Alina, Viper, Kowalski hadn't spoken a word during the briefing, but her dark eyes held the kind of intensity that made smart men nervous and foolish ones underestimate her completely. Viper's reputation preceded her like whispers in a cathedral. Born to Polish immigrants in Detroit's industrial heart, she'd grown up watching her father rebuild engines in their garage, learning that patience and precision could resurrect dead machines. Her hands, small but steady, could field strip a carburetor at 12 and were threading needles through enemy fire at 28. She'd earned her wings when most people assumed she was playing dress-up, and her call sign during a training exercise that left instructors speechless and fellow pilots wondering if they'd witnessed divine intervention or elaborate suicide. The A-10 wasn't just her aircraft, it was her religion. While other pilots coveted sleek F-16s or mighty F-15s, Viper had fallen in love with the ungainly beast that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and stubbornness. The Thunderbolt II was ugly in the way that bulldogs were ugly, functional, intimidating, and absolutely perfect for the job it was designed to do. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft fire. Its twin General Electric turbofan engines were mounted high to avoid ground debris. Everything about the machine screamed durability over elegance, and everything about Viper screamed the same philosophy. She'd flown 93 combat missions over 2 tours, earning Distinguished Flying Cross twice, and the respect of ground troops who knew her call sign meant salvation was 30 seconds out. But respect among infantry grunts didn't translate to acceptance in briefing rooms full of testosterone and tradition. To most of her colleagues, she remained an anomaly, tolerated but never truly embraced. Morrison's voice cut through her reverie. "Captain Kowalski, step forward." The words carried the weight of ceremony, but Viper recognized the underlying current of desperation. This wasn't recognition, it was exploitation of her unique skills for an impossible mission. She rose from her chair with fluid grace, ignoring the subtle shifts and sidelong glances from the other pilots. Her flight suit was immaculate, her bearing professional, but something indefinable in her posture suggested coiled energy waiting for release. "Yes, sir." "Captain, I need someone to take an A-10 into the Korangal Valley at minimum altitude and maximum prejudice. Intelligence suggests our people are being held in a compound approximately here." His laser pointer highlighted a spot that made even hardened combat veterans wince. Terrain features include narrow canyon approaches, elevation changes exceeding 3,000 feet, and confirmed SAM installations at multiple choke points. Viper studied the display with the same intensity she'd once applied to her father's engine schematics. Her mind automatically calculated approach vectors, defensive measures, and exit strategies. The mission was insane by conventional standards, but the A-10 wasn't conventional, and neither was she. Major Reynolds cleared his throat, discomfort evident in his voice. "Sir, perhaps we should consider." "Consider what, Major?" Morrison's interruption was sharp as broken glass. "That a woman can't handle what needs handling. That the best close air support pilot in my command isn't qualified because she doesn't fit your preconceptions." The general's words hit the room like artillery rounds, leaving silence in their wake. Viper spoke for the first time, her voice steady and professional. "General Morrison, I'd like to review the intelligence package and conduct a detailed mission analysis. If the tactical situation supports it, I'm prepared to accept the assignment." No bravado, no false heroics, just calm competence that somehow made the impossible seem merely difficult. The mission briefing continued for another hour, but the essential elements were clear. Penetrate heavily defended airspace, identify and neutralize specific targets while avoiding collateral damage, and extract without becoming another casualty statistic. It was the kind of assignment that separated legends from footnotes, and everyone in the room understood the stakes. As the assembled pilots filed out, muttering among themselves about suicide missions and political correctness, Viper remained behind. Morrison approached her with something resembling paternal concern mixed with professional necessity. "Alina," he said, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship, "I won't lie to you. This mission has a low probability of success and a high probability of making your wife a widow." He paused, studying her reaction. "I'm asking because you're the only pilot I trust to thread this particular needle." Viper's response came without hesitation. "Sir, I didn't join the Air Force to fly safe missions. Those prisoners didn't volunteer to be captured, and they're counting on us to bring them home." She gathered her materials with practiced efficiency. "I'll have a mission plan ready by 800 tomorrow." Morrison watched her go, wondering if he'd just signed her death warrant or witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. Outside, the Afghan sun continued its relentless journey across a sky that would soon host either triumph or tragedy. The flight line at Bagram buzzed with pre-dawn activity as ground crews prepared aircraft for another day of endless war. Fuel trucks rumbled between hardened aircraft shelters, their diesel engines competing with the whine of hydraulic systems and the occasional supersonic crack of departing fighters. But in Shelter 7, a different kind of preparation was underway. Viper stood beside her A-10, running her hands along the aircraft's battle-scarred fuselage like a physician examining a patient. The Thunderbolt II bore the accumulated wisdom of 93 combat missions, patched bullet holes, replaced panels, and the kind of honest where that came from doing hard jobs in hostile places. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, watched with professional pride as her pilot conducted the pre-flight inspection. "She's ready for whatever hell you're planning to drag her through today, Captain," Santos said, her Boston accent thick with affection for both pilot and machine. "Fresh 30 rounds, full fuel load, and I've triple-checked every system twice." She paused, studying Viper's unusually somber expression. "This one's different, isn't it?" Viper nodded, still focused on her aircraft. The A-10's nose art, a coiled Viper with Polish eagle wings, seemed to watch her with painted eyes that held secrets and promises. "Different enough that I need you to promise me something, Maria." She turned to face her crew chief, and Santos was surprised to see vulnerability beneath the professional mask. "If something goes wrong today, make sure they don't blame the bird. She's never let me down, and I won't let her reputation suffer for my mistakes." Santos felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn temperature. In 5 years of working together, Viper had never talked about not coming back. "Captain, you're starting to sound like you're writing your own obituary." "Not writing it," Viper replied, settling into her ejection seat and beginning the startup sequence. "Just making sure the story gets told right if someone else has to finish it." The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofans spooled up with their characteristic whine, and conversation became impossible over the engine noise. The taxi to runway 3 gave Viper time to review her mission plan one final time. The route took her through the Coringal Valley's back door, a narrow canyon approach that would mask her from most early warning systems but leave zero margin for error. The compound sat in a natural amphitheater, surrounded by peaks that rose like cathedral spires toward the Afghan sky. Intelligence photos showed concrete bunkers, vehicle revetments, and what appeared to be a prison facility near the center of the complex. Her target list was precise: neutralize air defenses without destroying the prisoner holding area, suppress enemy positions to enable ground force extraction, and survive long enough to provide overwatch during the rescue operation. Simple in concept, potentially impossible in execution. "Tower, Viper 1-1 requesting departure clearance," she transmitted, her voice professional despite the butterflies performing aerobatics in her stomach. "Viper 1-1 Tower, cleared for takeoff runway 3, wind 040 at 15, altimeter 299er2. Contact departure control passing 1,000 feet." The controller's voice carried routine professionalism, unaware that he might be speaking to a legend in the making or witnessing the beginning of a tragedy. They accelerated down the concrete runway with the deliberate purpose of a freight train. Unlike the explosive acceleration of fighters, the Thunderbolt II gathered momentum with steady determination, lifting off when physics and engineering agreed the time was right. Viper felt the familiar sensation of wheels retracting and landing gear doors closing, sealing her into a world where only skill and luck determined survival. The early morning sky stretched endlessly above the Hindu Kush Mountains, painted in shades of rose and gold that would have inspired poets if they hadn't been too busy trying to survive. Below, Afghanistan's unforgiving landscape rolled past in shades of brown and tan, broken by the occasional green slash of an irrigated valley or the geometric precision of a forward operating base. "Departure, Viper 1-1 passing 1,000 feet, requesting vectors to working area," Viper transmitted, beginning her journey toward a destination that existed somewhere between courage and insanity. "Viper 1-1 departure, radar contact, turn left heading 270, climb and maintain flight level 150. Contact Overlord on secure frequency when ready." The controller's instructions were routine, but both he and Viper understood that routine ended the moment she entered the Coringal Valley. As the A-10 climbed toward its cruising altitude, Viper allowed herself a moment to appreciate the machine carrying her toward destiny. The Thunderbolt II had been designed in the 1970s to kill Soviet tanks on European battlefields that, mercifully, never materialized. Instead, it had found its calling in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, anywhere ground troops needed precise, devastating fire support delivered by pilots willing to fly low and risk everything. The aircraft's reputation was legendary among infantry units. Its massive GAU-8 cannon could fire depleted uranium rounds at rates exceeding 4,000 rounds per minute, turning enemy positions into smoking ruins with surgical precision. Its armor could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft weapons that would destroy lesser aircraft. Most importantly, its pilots had earned reputations for staying over target areas long after sensible people had departed, providing cover for ground troops with the dedication of guardian angels equipped with 30 cannons. But today's mission would test every limit the A-10 was designed to exceed. The Korangal Valley was known throughout the theater as the Valley of Death, a narrow defile where helicopters went to die, and fixed-wing aircraft faced impossible choices between exposure and destruction. Taliban forces had learned to use the terrain as a weapon, positioning anti-aircraft systems where they could achieve maximum effect against minimum maneuverability. Overlord, Viper 11 checking in on secure frequency. Viper transmitted as she switched to the encrypted channel that would carry her through the most dangerous hour of her life. Viper 11, Overlord. We have you on scope. Current situation unchanged. Friendlies are confirmed in the target area. Enemy forces remain active and alert. Weather is clear with unlimited visibility. Be advised, we've lost contact with Recon Team Alpha approximately 30 minutes ago. The controller's voice carried professional calm, but Viper detected underlying tension that suggested the situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The information hit her like cold water. Recon Team Alpha was supposed to provide intelligence updates and coordinate ground-level targeting information. Without their guidance, she'd be flying blind into a hornet's nest, relying on satellite photos and prayers to separate friend from foe. Copy, Overlord. Viper 11 proceeding to target area. Request immediate update if contact with Alpha is reestablished. She checked her weapon systems one final time, ensuring that every switch, every circuit, every mechanical component was prepared for the violence ahead. The Hindu Kush mountains rose around her like the backbone of some prehistoric monster, their peaks shrouded in morning mist that would burn off within the hour. The landscape below transitioned from rolling hills to knife-edge ridges separated by valleys so narrow they seemed barely wide enough for her aircraft's wingspan. This was terrain that had swallowed armies throughout history, from Alexander the Great to the Soviet Union, to the current coalition forces learning the same harsh lessons about Afghanistan's unforgiving geography. Viper began her descent toward the valley floor, trading altitude for concealment and maneuverability for survival. The A-10's wing-mounted engines shifted to a lower pitch as she reduced power, beginning her approach to what would either become her greatest triumph or her final resting place. At 8,000 feet above sea level, the air grew thin enough to affect engine performance and dense enough to hide a multitude of sins. Every ridge could conceal a surface-to-air missile launcher. Every shadow might harbor enemy observers with radios and malicious intent. The morning sun, beautiful from a distance, became a tactical liability that could blind her at crucial moments or silhouette her aircraft against the sky like a target in a shooting gallery. The valley entrance appeared ahead, a narrow gap between towering walls of granite and limestone that had been carved by geological forces over millions of years. From her current altitude, it looked manageable, just another canyon approach in a landscape full of similar features. But Viper knew that appearances in Afghanistan were invariably deceptive, and the difference between heroism and stupidity often measured in seconds and feet. She switched her radio to the emergency frequency, knowing that American prisoners might be listening and hopping for any sign that rescue was coming. Any American forces in the Korangal Valley, this is Viper 11 providing close air support. Help is on the way. The transmission was brief, professional, and carried more hope than confidence. No response came through her headset, but she hadn't expected one. If prisoners were indeed being held in the target compound, their captors wouldn't appreciate unauthorized radio communications. Still, the message served its purpose, letting anyone listening know that the United States Air Force hadn't forgotten about them. The valley walls rose higher as she approached the entrance, creating a natural funnel that would channel her aircraft toward whatever reception committee waited inside. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with practiced precision, arming weapon systems, adjusting radar settings, and preparing for the kind of low-altitude combat that separated professional pilots from smoking holes in the ground. Overlord, Viper 11 beginning approach to target area, going tactical from this point forward. The transmission marked her transition from routine flight operations to combat mode, where split-second decisions and perfect execution meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Copy Viper 11. Good hunting. The controller's response was brief, acknowledging that from this point forward, Elena Viper Kowalski would be largely on her own in a place where angels feared to tread and A-10 pilots had learned to thrive. The canyon walls closed around her like the jaws of some ancient predator, shutting out the morning sun and creating a twilight world of shadows and echoes. The A-10's engines reverberated off the stone surfaces, announcing her presence to anyone within miles. Stealth was no longer an option. Speed and violence of action would have to suffice. At 500 feet above the valley floor and descending, Viper caught her first glimpse of the target compound through a gap in the terrain ahead. Intelligence photos hadn't prepared her for the reality of what she was facing, a complex that seemed to grow organically from the surrounding landscape, with defensive positions that had been planned by someone who understood both terrain and tactics. The real war was about to begin. The Korangal Valley revealed itself like a wound in the Earth's surface, narrow and deep, carved by millennia of seasonal floods and geological violence. Viper's A-10 descended into this natural cathedral of stone and shadow, trading the safety of altitude for the tactical advantage of surprise. At 300 feet above the valley floor, she could see details that satellite photos had only hinted at. The compound ahead wasn't just fortified. It was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Concrete bunkers grew from the valley walls like malignant tumors, their firing ports positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would shred any aircraft foolish enough to approach at predictable angles. Vehicle-mounted anti-aircraft guns sat in carefully prepared positions, their crews probably already tracking her approach through the narrow canyon. Most ominously, she spotted what appeared to be shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile teams, positioned on elevated platforms that would give them clear shots at low-flying aircraft. "Contact," she murmured into her microphone, more to herself than to any controller who might be listening. Her finger moved to the weapon selection switch, cycling through her available ordnance: Maverick missiles for hardened targets, cluster bombs for area denial, and always the massive GAU-8 cannon that formed the aircraft's backbone and her personal signature. The compound's layout became clearer as she approached the valley's widest point. 3 distinct sections were connected by covered walkways that suggested the designers had planned for exactly this kind of air attack. The northern section housed obvious defensive positions and what appeared to be vehicle maintenance facilities. The southern section contained several low, windowless buildings that could be barracks, supply depots, or prison facilities. Between them, the central area featured a larger structure that screamed "command post" to anyone with tactical training. Viper's problem was identifying which building held American prisoners without destroying the very people she'd come to save. Rules of engagement demanded positive identification before weapons release, but positive identification required getting close enough to become an easy target for every hostile weapon system in the valley. Her radar warning receiver began painting symbols on her head-up display. Multiple air defense systems had achieved radar lock on her aircraft. The electronic warfare suite automatically began dispensing chaff and flares, creating a constellation of false targets designed to confuse incoming missiles. The cockpit filled with warning tones that would have intimidated lesser pilots, but which Viper accepted as simply part of the professional environment. Multiple SAM launches, multiple SAM launches, she announced over the emergency frequency, her voice calm despite the fact that at least 3 surface-to-air missiles were currently seeking her destruction. The A-10's defensive systems tracked the incoming threats, while Viper began the kind of aggressive maneuvering that would either save her life or tear her aircraft apart. The first missile streaked past her left wing, close enough that she could see its exhaust plume and feel the heat through the cockpit glass. Her response was immediate and violent. A hard right turn followed by a dive that brought her within 50 feet of the valley floor, using terrain masking to break the remaining missile locks while simultaneously positioning herself for her first attack run. Anti-aircraft tracers began filling the air around her, bright lines of destruction that would have been beautiful if they hadn't been designed to kill her. The enemy gunners had calculated her approach route correctly, but they'd underestimated both her aircraft's durability and her willingness to fly through curtains of fire that would have deterred more sensible people. Her first target was obvious, a ZSU-23-4 anti-aircraft gun that was pouring fire in her direction with the enthusiasm of someone who believed they had a reasonable chance of success. The GAU-8 cannon responded to her trigger pull with its characteristic sound, like the world's largest zipper being opened by an angry god. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streaked toward the enemy position at velocities that turned physics into poetry. The ZSU-23-4 disappeared in a cloud of smoke and flying metal, its crew's ambitions terminated by the simple reality that the A-10 had been designed to survive what they were throwing at it while delivering far more in return. Secondary explosions suggested ammunition storage had been compromised, eliminating that position as a future threat. But 3 more anti-aircraft positions remained active, and they'd learned from their colleagues' mistake. Instead of engaging her directly, they began tracking her movement, waiting for predictable flight paths that would give them higher probability shots. Viper recognized the tactic. These weren't amateur insurgents with more courage than training. They were professionals who understood air defense theory. Her response demonstrated why she'd earned her call sign and her reputation. Instead of flying predictable attack patterns, she began what could only be described as aerial ballet performed at lethal speeds in a confined space. Climbing, diving, sliding, and rolling through 3-dimensional maneuvers that pushed both her aircraft and her physiology to their limits. The A-10's design philosophy proved its worth in those crucial minutes. While sleeker aircraft might have been faster or more maneuverable, none could have absorbed the punishment that Viper's Thunderbolt II was taking while continuing to fight effectively. Small arms fire peppered her fuselage, leaving holes that would have been fatal to lesser machines, but which merely added character to an aircraft already bearing the scars of previous battles. Her second attack run targeted what appeared to be a command bunker, identifiable by its communication antennas and the increased activity around its entrance. A pair of Maverick missiles streaked from her wing pylons, their infrared seekers locked onto the heat signatures of the bunker's ventilation system. The explosions that followed were deeply satisfying from both tactical and psychological perspectives. But the mission's primary objective remained unclear. Intelligence had suggested American prisoners were being held somewhere in this complex, but Viper hadn't seen any indication of where they might be located. The rules of engagement prohibited her from simply destroying everything in sight. She needed positive identification of legitimate military targets while avoiding any structure that might contain friendlies. Her solution was characteristically direct and completely insane. Instead of maintaining altitude and standoff distance like any rational pilot, she began a series of low-level reconnaissance passes that brought her within small arms range of every enemy position in the valley. Flying at speeds barely above stall, she used her aircraft's sensors and her own eyes to examine each building, looking for any sign of American prisoners. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Every weapon system in the compound opened fire simultaneously, creating a dome of destruction that no aircraft should have been able to penetrate. Tracers filled the air like deadly fireworks, surface-to-air missiles launched from multiple positions, and small arms fire created a metallic rain that drummed against her aircraft's armor like hail on a tin roof. Viper flew through it all with the concentration of a surgeon and the aggression of a berserker, methodically cataloging each building, while simultaneously avoiding death by margins measured in inches and milliseconds. Her aircraft absorbed hits that would have downed civilian planes, but the A-10's legendary durability kept her flying and fighting. Then she saw it, a brief flash of reflective material from a window in the southern building complex. Sunlight reflecting off something that didn't belong in a Taliban compound. Glass, metal, or the reflective tape that American military personnel were trained to use for signaling aircraft. The reflection repeated, 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS in Morse code, transmitted by someone who knew that American pilots would recognize the international distress signal. Bingo! She'd found her people. The building housing the prisoners was surrounded by defensive positions that would make a conventional rescue impossible. But Viper hadn't come this far to be deterred by conventional limitations. Her mission parameters shifted from reconnaissance to close air support for a rescue operation that hadn't started yet but would need to happen soon. Overlord, Viper 1-1. I have positive identification of friendly personnel in the target area. Recommend immediate deployment of rescue assets to my current position. Her transmission carried the authority of someone who had just risked everything to obtain critical intelligence. Copy, Viper 1-1. Rescue assets are airborne and en route to your position. Estimated time of arrival 15 minutes. Can you maintain overwatch until they arrive? 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Her fuel was running low, her ammunition was depleted, and every anti-aircraft system in the valley was now focused on destroying her aircraft. But those prisoners had been signaling SOS, which meant they knew rescue was possible and were counting on her to make it happen. Affirmative, Overlord. Viper 1-1 will maintain position and provide cover for rescue operations. The words committed her to staying in the most dangerous place on Earth for another quarter hour, flying a damaged aircraft against odds that any reasonable person would have considered suicidal. But Alina, Viper, Kowalski had never been particularly reasonable, and the A-10 Thunderbolt II had never been designed for reasonable missions. The 15 minutes stretched into an eternity measured in heartbeats and near misses. Viper's fuel gauge showed numbers that would have sent most pilots racing toward the nearest airfield, but she remained over the target area, using every trick she'd learned in 93 previous combat missions to stay alive long enough to complete this one. Her tactics shifted from aggressive attack to desperate survival. Without sufficient ammunition for sustained combat, she relied on the psychological effect of her presence to suppress enemy movement while conserving what ordnance remained for critical targets. The enemy forces had learned to respect the A-10's capabilities, but they also recognized her vulnerability and pressed their advantage with increasing boldness. A shoulder-fired missile streaked past her canopy so close that she could see the individual fins on its guidance section. Her response was immediate, a violent barrel roll that brought her dangerously close to the valley walls but broke the missile's tracking solution. The explosion behind her aircraft sent shrapnel through her tail section, But the Thunderbolt II continued flying with the stubborn determination that had made it legendary. Her radio crackled with incoming transmissions. Viper 1-1, this is Dustoff 7-7. We're 5 minutes out from your position. Can you mark the landing zone? Dustoff 7-7 was a medical evacuation helicopter, heavily armed and crewed by pilots who specialized in extracting wounded personnel from hostile areas. Their arrival meant that someone had decided the intelligence was solid enough to risk additional aircraft and crew members. Dustoff 7-7, Viper 1-1. Landing zone is hot with multiple active air defense systems. Recommend you hold at a safe distance until I can suppress immediate threats. Even as she transmitted the warning, Viper was planning her final attack run, a desperate gamble that would expend her remaining ammunition to create a brief window of opportunity for the rescue helicopter. Her last Maverick missile streaked toward the most dangerous remaining anti-aircraft position, its warhead designed to penetrate hardened bunkers and eliminate whatever waited inside. The explosion was satisfactory, but 2 more defensive positions remained active and would certainly engage any helicopter that attempted to land. The GAU-8 cannon still held several dozen rounds, not enough for sustained combat, but sufficient for one final statement about American resolve and the price of holding prisoners. Viper pointed her aircraft at the remaining defensive positions and began her last attack run, flying straight into the concentrated fire of every remaining weapon system in the compound. The cockpit filled with the sound of impacts as enemy rounds found their mark. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel like a malevolent Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure dropped, electrical systems failed, and her engines began producing sounds that no pilot ever wants to hear. But the A-10 kept flying, and the GAU-8 kept firing, delivering 30mm destruction with the precision that had made Viper legendary. Both remaining anti-aircraft positions disappeared under withering fire, their crew's dedication terminated by the simple reality that courage was no match for depleted uranium rounds delivered by someone who refused to quit. The compound's defensive umbrella collapsed, leaving scattered small arms fire as the only remaining threat to incoming rescue aircraft. Dustoff 7-7, Viper 1-1. Landing zone is as clear as it's going to get. Prisoners are located in the southern building complex. Recommend immediate extraction before enemy reinforcements arrive. Her transmission carried the exhaustion of someone who had pushed themselves and their equipment beyond any reasonable limit. The rescue helicopter appeared over the valley rim like a mechanical angel, its rotors churning the thin mountain air as it descended toward the compound. Door gunners opened fire on suspected enemy positions, suppressing any remaining resistance while the aircraft settled into a landing pattern that would have been impossible without Viper's preparatory work. Ground rescue personnel fast-roped from the helicopter and began their assault on the building complex where American prisoners waited for salvation. Viper circled overhead, her damaged aircraft barely controllable but still providing overwatch for the rescue operation. Her fuel gauges showed numbers that mandated immediate departure, but she remained on station until the last possible moment. Viper 1-1, Dustoff 7-7. We have 5 American personnel recovered and are departing the area immediately. You are cleared to depart when ready. The transmission carried professional gratitude for air support that had made an impossible rescue merely extremely dangerous. Viper looked down at the compound one final time, noting the smoking ruins of defensive positions that had been eliminated by her aircraft's weapons. 5 Americans were going home because she had been willing to fly an impossible mission in an aircraft designed for exactly this kind of work. The satisfaction was deeper than any medal or commendation could provide. Roger Dustoff, Viper 1-1 departing the area. She pulled her battered A-10 into a climbing turn that carried her away from the Koringal Valley and toward the safety of friendly airspace. Behind her, Smoke columns rose into the Afghan sky like incense offerings to the gods of war. The flight back to Bagram tested every system on her aircraft and every skill she possessed as a pilot. Hydraulic failures made control inputs unpredictable. Electrical problems caused instrument readings to fluctuate wildly. One engine was producing power intermittently, forcing her to nurse the throttle like a physician monitoring a critical patient. But the A-10's reputation for bringing pilots home from impossible situations proved accurate once again. The runway at Bagram appeared ahead like a concrete lifeline stretching across the Afghan desert. Emergency vehicles were already positioned along the approach path, their crews prepared for whatever condition her aircraft might be in when it finally touched down. The tower controller's voice carried professional calm that couldn't quite conceal underlying concern for a pilot who had been out of radio contact for the past hour. Viper 11, Bagram Tower. You are cleared to land any runway, emergency vehicles standing by. State your condition. Viper's response was characteristically understated. Bagram Tower, Viper 11. Aircraft is flyable with multiple systems degraded. No assistance required for landing. The words didn't convey the reality of flying a machine that was held together by determination and engineering excellence, but they reflected her confidence in both her abilities and her aircraft's fundamental durability. The landing was more controlled crash than graceful touchdown, but the A-10's landing gear absorbed the impact with the same stoic determination that characterized everything about the aircraft. Emergency crews surrounded the plane as soon as it rolled to a stop, but Viper was already shutting down systems and preparing for what she knew would be an extensive debriefing session. Technical Sergeant Santos appeared at her cockpit as the canopy opened, her expression mixing professional concern with personal relief. "Captain, this bird looks like it went through a blender, but she brought you home." Her hands were already examining battle damage that would require weeks of repair work. Viper climbed down from her cockpit on unsteady legs, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission finally dissipating. The aircraft behind her bore the scars of combat like badges of honor, bullet holes, shrapnel damage, and the kind of honest where that came from doing hard jobs in hostile places. But both pilot and machine had survived to fight another day. General Morrison appeared through the crowd of emergency responders and maintenance personnel, his expression unreadable in the harsh Afghan sunlight. For a moment, Viper wondered if her unauthorized tactical decisions had crossed some line that would end her flying career. Then she saw the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Captain Kowalski," he said formally, "I believe you've proven that the A-10 can indeed fly lower than anyone thought possible." His words carried acknowledgement that went beyond official recognition. They represented acceptance into a brotherhood that transcends.